Buenos días.
Good morning.
My name is Raimundo Ferrer Hernandez, and I'm General Director of the Ramón Areces Foundation.
Cuyo patronato, calidad.
I would like to wish you a very warm welcome and thank you very much for joining us here today. I would like to thank the chair, José María Patino. I also want to welcome our speakers, particularly those of them coming from abroad. And I want to pay tribute to Agustín Blanco and Maite Sancho, who were the real driving forces behind this event. And last but not least, thank you very much to all of you. We're very thankful to you for joining us and for being so caring and so empathetic with us when you heard that we were organizing an event on this subject. I also want to underscore the close relationship between the Ramón Areces Foundation and the José María Martín Patino Chair of the University of Comillas. We have been working with them for many years, particularly supporting the España report, which is one of the best sociological studies on the evolution of Spanish society and the many problems affecting it. We will, Agustín, keep supporting the future editions of this report because we believe it is a wonderful instrument of reflection on the problems affecting Spanish society. I would also want to pay tribute to José María Martín Patino, who played a very important role in the recent history of our country. Today's meeting on long-term care and the challenges of long-term care in Spain and abroad is a particularly topical issue dealing with a problem that is going to affecting us increasingly, both as society and as individual. The problem of dependence has become more intense in the last few years after the pandemic. We have detected many shortcomings, limitations, needs, and we have detected a mismatch between the problem and the solutions provided. But we shouldn't fool ourselves, because the problem is not a new problem. The demographic counter-revolution, budgetary problems, and health care needs are just some of the elements which make it necessary not only for privileged, not only for public administrations, but for society as a whole to pay specific attention to these problems. I've just lost my mother, who died at the age of 102, so I know what I'm talking about. We live more and more years, and fewer and fewer children are born. The Economist this week published that in the UK there are 300,000 births short every year. So we will have to adapt ourselves better to this new reality, because we're going to be living more and more years. So I want to wish you all the best in today's meeting. I want to thank the José María Patino chair once again, and I just stay at your disposal for anything you may need to further the well-being of Spanish society. Thank you. I give the floor to Agustín Blanco. Thank you, Raymond. I'm Agustín Blanco. I'm director of the José María Martín Patino's chair of the University of Comillas in the north of Spain. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this meeting devoted to one of the most important subjects of our time, long-term care. The Ramón Areces Foundation and the Martín Patino chair have been working on this issue for over 30 years. We have been collaborating very fruitfully in the last 30 years. And one of the biggest achievements of this collaboration has been the publication of the report on Spanish society that we publish every year. 30 years ago, both institutions felt the need to reflect on the different economic and political challenges entailed by Spain's accession to the European Union. That is how, with the support of the Ramón Areces Foundation, the España report came about, whose aim is to offer an overall reinterpretation of Spanish reality and of the most relevant and significant trends. The report wishes to be a point of reference for a public debate in order to be able to share the basic principles of general interest: education, employment, healthcare, care of dependents, aging, climate change, housing. Those are just a few of the topics we have been reflecting on in the last few decades, constructing a historical narrative of the evolution of Spanish society. 2 years ago, the España report 2021 devoted a specific chapter to the future of long-term care, drafted by Maite Sanchez and Teresa Martinez, who are with us here today. The revolution of longevity is just one of the socio-economic and demographic processes experienced by the most developed societies, particularly the Spanish society. Of course, the increase in life expectancy is a success, but of course this cannot overshadow the increasing needs of long-term care of an increasingly large group of people affected by physical and mental dependence. The hard experience of COVID-19 underscored the need of rethinking the model used to take care of these people, particularly the residential model. The greater protagonism of home services, the role of housing are essential references of long-term care. Also, the improvement of training and occupational conditions of the different professionals involved. Also, a better or a more efficient provision of the resources needed, and a better coordination between public and private institutions. These are one of the main challenges we have detected in Spain, but Spain shares these challenges with other countries around it. So we want to talk about all of these things in a constructive way. In this seminar, which will be structured into 2 different panels with the presence of important national and international experts. The first panel, which will begin right away, has the title Long-Term Care, Challenges and Uncertainties. It's going to be chaired by Maite Sanchez, who's a psychologist who has long experience in the care of elderly people. She's vice president of the Spanish Geriatric Society. She currently collaborates with international institutions on projects on long-term care and their transformation, and she has been recently recognized by the United Nations as one of the 50 world leaders that have contributed the most to the transformation of our society for a better aging process. The second panel will begin at 12:30, and the title of this second panel will be Transforming the Residential Model. Where are we heading for? And this chair is going to be chaired by Eva Puga, who's an expert in demographics, and she's a member of the research group on aging in that center. She has done extensive research on the impact of dependence on aging and on the response by public services to disability in elderly people. At the end of each panel, we will be opening Q&A sessions. To conclude this presentation, I just want to thank, first of all, the Ramón Areces Foundation, particularly the Foundation's Director General, Raymond, for his unstinted commitment with the holding of this seminar. Also to Adelina, Gregorio, Teresa, David, and Anneloy, all the speakers. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation to attend this meeting. And I also want to thank the audience for the effort they have made to squeeze this meeting into their busy schedules, which goes to show their enormous interest in the matter we're going to be talking about today. We trust that initiatives of this kind are going to result in the development of a culture that is conducive to improving long-term care and, facing up to the challenges posed by aging of the population. Thank you. We can't hear the speaker. She's not using the microphone properly. Good morning. I would like to repeat my thankfulness to the Ramón Areces Foundation and to the Martín Patino chair, and I would also like to add my gratitude to Gabriel Gallardo, who has gone to the greatest lengths to disseminate information about this meeting, which has resulted in a very, very significant turnout. There's a lot of people in the room. Having said this, I also want to thank all of you for joining us in this wonderful venue, where I'm sure that we are going to be able to share ideas and learn from people with a long and recognized experience. My role is that of a chair. I will be the chairperson in this meeting. I am going to be very strict, and I'm going to try and be a good chair. And I would like to ask you to write down your questions, because this will help me control time and make sure that your questions are as brief as possible, so that as many people as possible can ask their own questions. This is going to be a strictly technical forum. We decided not to have any political participants. It's only going to be technicians. This is a turning point for analyzing and sharing and understanding about different experiences in the field of long-term care. And COVID-19 has given us this opportunity to revise our long-term care models, which, let's be honest, are quite deficient. In Spain, we have embarked on a thorough revision process, and we are reflecting on how we're going to be able to better care for people. And the second panel will be dealing with a change in our approach, focusing more on the people themselves. So, and this will force us to carry out a complete overhaul of this area. We will have to change the types of professionals we need, the resources we use, and, a series of other things. For me, it is an honor to introduce the three people sitting next to me, because all three of them have different experiences, but they are role models for long-term care. The first speaker is going to be David Labovsky, who is a professor at the University of Harvard. He teaches healthcare policy at the School of Medicine. He has an extremely vast research background with over 200 articles in index journals. So this is, not something you find very commonly. And he is also, well, he's appeared 5 times in the American Congress to talk about matters related to long-term care, and he's a member of the Medicare Advisory Committee. As you know, Medicare is, deals with health insurance in the United States. They manage health insurance. So David has a very long CV and a very long background. I just want to mention that in the last few years, he has also been part of the COVID committee on safety and quality in nursing homes in the UK. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be giving each speaker 10 minutes for an introductory, for making a few introductory comments, and then we will be going into the nitty-gritty. After that, we will hear from Adelina. I will introduce all three of them so that I don't have to interrupt later on. Adelina is a well-loved person. We like her very much in Spain. Well, she's Catalan, but she's a lot more English than Catalan. But she works at the London School of Economics in the Care Policy and Evaluation Unit. She has done a lot of work during the COVID crisis because she led a platform, many of you may be familiar with it, LTC COVID platform, where people could contribute their experiences. People from different countries in the world could, contribute their experiences and some data. So Adelina's contribution has been invaluable because she helped us a lot understand, what was going on. Her research interests are focused on the economic aspects. She's an expert in economics, also the support of people with dementia. I think that is her pet subject today, and also funding of care in the UK and in the rest of the world. At present, she leads a research project on the lessons learned from the COVID pandemic for a long-term care. And she has also conducted studies on the impact of inequalities in dementia care. She is going to give us some ideas on she's going to make an international comparison in terms of long-term care. And finally, we will hear from one of the people who is most experienced in the field of dependency in Spain. I am talking of Gregorio Rodriguez, who's a chair in social sciences at the University of Alcalá, which is a city about 30 kilometers north of Madrid. But he has been a fellow traveler in the preparation of the law for the promotion of personal autonomy and care of dependency. We have worked very hard on that law. The results are still to be seen, but we did put in a lot of work. And now, at that time, Gregorio participated in the drafting of the white paper on dependency before the law was enacted, and then he appeared at the Spanish Parliament in 2009, and he has coordinated the evaluations carried out by the government on this law, one in 2011 and the other one in 2022, which was very recently. And this is a very good analysis, particularly of the challenges that await us in the future. So we have three extremely proficient speakers with us. Each of them will have 10 minutes to make some introductory comments, and then we will be making a few more specific comments, first from the panel, and then we will give the floor to the audience. David, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to speak in English, so I hope your English is better than my Spanish. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the hosts here, to the foundation, to Maite. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. What a beautiful setting, and what a beautiful city. I want to start by reflecting on where we've been over the last several years. The pandemic was really kind of an incredibly sad time in long-term care, yet this post-pandemic period is a time of incredible opportunity. I was asked to speak about innovation in long-term care, and unfortunately in countries like the United States, and as I'm coming to understand the Spanish system, there's often a lack of innovation in long-term care. Long-term care at its core is a very basic set of services, bathing and dressing and toileting. I'm not really talking about changing the sort of mix of services here. I'm not referring to robot caregivers like they have in Japan. I'm thinking about really changing the dynamics of how we pay and how we deliver long-term care, both what we pay in terms of generosity and how we sort of allocate the mix of different services. We really need, I think, to both in the US and here in Spain, begin to think outside the box in terms of allocating our long-term care budget. This is not a new problem. This dates back decades here in Spain. It dates back decades in the US. But we have a real opportunity, I think, right now. I was part of a panel during the pandemic, and as part of that panel, we interviewed a lot of caregivers, and one of them had this great quote. She said, "The pandemic has lifted the veil on a social ill that's been present for decades. The veil has been lifted. What can we do now that we can sort of see clearly?" I'm going to talk about 4 points here, and I want to go through each of them very quickly, given my time. First, we need to invest in home and community-based services. That's what everybody wants. They want it here in Spain. They want it in the US. Unfortunately, both countries have an institution-dominated long-term care system. The Netherlands, we're going to have a speaker from the Netherlands, they've actually made an investment in home and community-based services. Most countries haven't. If your parent needs long-term care in the Netherlands, the state is going to step in. If your parent needs long-term care in the US, it's up to the family. We need to invest in HCBS, home and community-based services. Home and community-based services did much better during the pandemic relative to institutional services. The second point, we need to transform nursing homes. In the US, we've had this small initiative called the greenhouses. There are other models like this around the world. These are smaller homes, 8 to 12 older adults, empowered staff, resident-directed care. So it's up to the resident when they get up, when they go to sleep, how they live their life. They have autonomy. The staff have autonomy. They're empowered. This is the vision, but it's that small home model living together. It's not this huge institution. There was a study that came out showing just the correlation between size of nursing homes and number of COVID deaths. The country that looked the worst, so that was up there at the top right, was where I live, the US. The country that was the second worst was where all of you live. That was Spain. We both need to invest in smaller home models that have resident-directed models of care and empowered staff. The third point, regardless of whether you're in a nursing home or in the home and community, we need to invest in workers. We have a shortage of caregivers in the United States. This is going to be true throughout the globe. The first point, we're going to need to pay and treat these workers better. They need benefits. We had this amazing study in the US in terms of all of the healthcare professions. The profession that exhibited the largest growth in pay during the pandemic was nursing home workers. Yet we lost the most number of nursing home staff. Seems upside down, right? We paid them more relatively, and yet we lost relatively more staff. That says to me, pay is necessary but not sufficient. We need a lot more than pay. One thing we need is better working conditions. I mentioned in the greenhouse, the staff are empowered. Working conditions are much better. We need to do that across the world, and certainly within the United States. Immigration is going to be a big part of the care force in the US and Spain and elsewhere. We just did a study on US data showing when there's a spike in immigration in a local area, more nursing home workers, better quality of care. That's not a substitute for pay or benefits or anything else. That's a complement. We need immigrants to help fortify this workforce, but we also need to pay them and give them good working conditions. Final point, and then I'll turn it back. We need to leverage technology. Once again, I don't want any robot caregivers in the nursing homes. What I do want, however, is an investment in telemedicine and other services to help get clinicians into these buildings. We have a problem in the US in that we have physicians missing in action in nursing homes. They're very disconnected from the long-term care workforce. During the pandemic, we had a waiver where now we could provide telemedicine in the nursing home setting. And guess what? There was a huge spike in the early part of the pandemic in terms of getting clinical services to individuals. That's the kind of innovation we need to continue post-pandemic. I did a study many years ago before the pandemic that looked at telemedicine in nursing homes, and we found investment in telemedicine actually led to fewer hospital transfers, better care. The problem was the nursing home was paying for the telemedicine and the savings were going to our government. We call that the wrong pocket problem in the US. The dollars aren't going to the right pocket, and so not surprisingly, we published our paper. We were very excited about it. We got lots of media attention. Then the nursing home did away with the program. And it's like, it was really frustrating. Here we had this great model, but the payments weren't aligned. The payments are now aligned in the US. We need to see that kind of investment. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying we have lifted the veil here. We have an opportunity. You have an opportunity here in Spain. I think we're going to see many countries revisit long-term care policy. We were talking earlier, it's going to take vision. It's also going to take money. And the Spain and the US and other countries have the vision, the dollars to take advantage of this incredible opportunity. I'll stop there and I'll look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Adelina is going to be the perfect complement. You can go ahead. I'm going to speak Spanish. As I live since long in England, and as I might have said, I'm quite... sometimes I don't get the Spanish words as fluently as I would like to. First of all, thank you very much for your invitation. It's a very important discussion and very convenient. Thank you very much to the Fundación Ramón Areces and also for the effort you made for me to come yesterday night after having had my flight cancelled. I thank them for the effort of guaranteeing that I was going to be able to be here today. I'm going to start talking about how the care systems were when the pandemic arrived. More and more so, we are more who are going to be needing by the end of our life, maybe before even, some sort of care. The older that we live, more probabilities do we have to require that care. For many people, the care will be something that will happen for a few months at the end of life in a quite predictable manner. The family can even take it fine, but for some this can take years of their life. This means a cost for the family and for the individuals. And as a society, more and more so, we are recognizing that this is a risk that we want to share, that we want to be protected against mutually. So many countries, or some countries, are starting now, like Spain, to recognize the care as one of the pillars of the welfare system. And this is a great progress. But it is also true that in many countries this has not been accompanied by the development of the care system that is consistent with governance and funding mechanisms and protection mechanisms of an assessment that are apt for their function or their role. As David said, when you don't have a good funding system, even in the good initiatives are lost. And the pandemic COVID did found us like that, founded with systems that were not yet well developed in many countries. During the pandemic, we were seeing reports through the initiative LTC COVID of more than 30 countries, reading what was making more difficult the response to COVID in our care systems. There were four main factors that I'm going to mention and develop here. First of all, the governance, the old systems of governance that changed from incremental changes and partial changes that were derived in fragmented responsibility systems only with not only responsibilities but also very important gaps that at the moment of the pandemic, in many countries, there was nobody that was clearly in charge of the response that had to be given to the pandemic. And we also found that in many countries, there were no communication channels that were well established that could reach rapidly from where the decisions were being made, the scientific decisions were being made to the service providers. Many countries, those channels didn't exist, and they had to be created in a very rapid fashion, and very often slightly clumsy way of doing it. The second factor that we identified was the impact of the not enough funding in the care systems. And this has been in spite of great increases in the demand, increases in the complexity of the needs of taking care. And more in nursing homes, we have people with dementia, multiple chronic diseases, and those services very often have not been thought for people with they are thought for people with a lower degree of dependency. This lack of investment in the sector derived in the fact that in many countries we found a lack of infrastructure of care in the community, as David has already mentioned. We had a infrastructure that was obsolete, of low quality, too large nursing homes without having the capacity of being able to increase or to adapt the measures that were going to be implemented. I'm repeating somehow what you have said before, with bad labor conditions that derived in a lack of staff. In many countries, the residents didn't have the right to pay for the disease, and they didn't. If they stopped working, they had to do that with their own money. If they go back to work, these were people who had a risk of infection. Those people were in very difficult positions. And we did find as well that this is a sector in many countries where we can't compete with what is offered in terms of type of contract and payment with the supermarkets, and that is very serious. We also found staff in many countries staff that was underqualified, and they were not familiarized with the control measures of infections and difficulties in implementing those measures. The third factor is that, and we have seen that in nearly all countries, and I think this is something that we really have to learn from, and maybe this is what should be most easy. The lack of mechanisms to guarantee the rights and respect of the fundamental rights of the people who give and to receive those services. We saw they were deprived from freedom, they were deprived from the right to their family life, and in many occasions as well to the right of receiving proper health care. And the fourth factor identified was the lack of effective mechanisms for the coordination of care systems and healthcare systems. But we also saw that there were things that did work well. There were good innovations, and We have also seen that some systems did work better than others. And in a project that we are achieving now for the British government, we are looking at what are the lessons that Great Britain can learn from other countries. We have chosen 4 countries: Denmark, France, Holland, and the Netherlands and Japan. Not everything that we've learned from these countries are good lessons. There are things where we have learned what doesn't work well for them. But there were some positive things that we believe would be very important to reflect upon. Starting by Denmark and Japan, these are 2 countries where they have done something that in reality only a minority of countries have done, to make a comprehensive reform of the care system, where they have thought very deeply in the governance. The governance is very clear-cut. It's very clear-cut as well. Thanks to this governance, what are the channels, the routine channels of communication that go directly through the whole network, all the levels of governance, and reach the providers. We have also seen that in Denmark, a good data system integrating the healthcare systems and care systems allowed to design and to rapidly respond to COVID. We have seen these are countries where these comprehensive reforms have given good results. From the Netherlands, we also looked at the great respect that is given to the rights of people in nursing homes. And our colleagues from Holland, they think that this was not enough respect. But seen from England, we thought it was a very big respect, because there is a law that gives all people their voice. In all nursing care, we have to have a council of residents formed by the relatives of the residents, and they have to be involved in all the decisions that are made concerning the daily life of the people who live there. In the practice, the implementation maybe is not the ideal one, but that this legal mechanism exists seems to me a great progress, and something that many countries should also have. And from France and Japan, we learned about the importance of being well prepared for emergencies in a sector that we've seen can be so frail. As I've said, not all the responses are good. We have also learned that the problem of the lack of staff in this sector, we have seen that in all countries worldwide. And after the pandemic, this has been even more difficult. We have to think that the people who have been working in this sector have experienced such big levels of stress, moral injury, and even seeing many griefs, so that throughout that time, very hard and difficult situations, disability, and without having the resources of being recovered themselves. And we've seen that in countries like France, what they tried to pay some of the staff that work in this sector in order to increase the salary level, very often, as this was not increased by other measures in order to increase the self-esteem and the personal and the progression, the possibilities of progression in the sector, they didn't reach the result that they desired. We have to have a fundamental revision of how is the employment in the care sector, and for that we have to think very deeply in how is the funding system, how is this going to affect the capability for these providers of having better conditions. And what have we concluded? In 2011, the OECD told us that in many countries, those incremental changes that have been done developing care systems have led us to very fragmented care systems. In 2011, they said that the future of the care system is more demand, more expenditure, more workers, and that in order to face that challenge, we need a comprehensive vision of the care in the long term, and that it's not enough to improvise. I think we're still there, and that we know how important it is to have a well-thought and organized system, and how important it is to make an overall revision of the whole system in each country. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Adelina, por tu...
Thank you, Adelina, for your being so punctual. And now, Gregorio, you have the floor.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning. Thank you to the Areces Foundation and the Martín Patino Chair for your invitation to this event. Well, they asked me to have a discipline of 10 minutes. I'm going to try to implement this as much as I can. I would like to point out that the social knowledge is a collective knowledge. So the fact that I'm sitting here doesn't mean that I'm the one who knows that. In this room, there are more people that know as much or more than I do. And I have learned the possibility of learn about providers, experts, etc. And at the end of the ideas are the organized condensation, but some of us who dedicate to this type of activity, so that this is going to be helpful for a better design of the public policies. Even in the last assessment, we were a very large team of professionals. Vicente Barbán, Julia Montserrat, Raquel Martínez Buján, Agustín Huete, Jiménez, and Tony Vila, Emmanuel Aguilar. I've said the whole list because I had to say it, because what I'm going to say belongs to them as well. After that, I will try to summarize all my viewpoints. First of all, the system of long-term care in Spain is a system that is fragile, frail, and filled with hazards. It has to go through different financial crises that have struck it very badly. A first stage between 2007 and 2010, we then went into a regression phase, part of being demolished from my point of view, then it recovered. And then in the last stage, fortunately, we have been able to start again with a reform that has been intense, and we have to hope for it to continue, because if it doesn't go on, obviously this recovery will purely be a transient one. I'm not saying that only in financial investment terms, but in terms of social agreements, of advances in quality, etc. Throughout all these assessments, there were always two fundamental questions that summarize everything. Can we improve the coverage and quality of the system? The second question, is the system sustainable in the long run? Two questions from the White Book until now. My answer is that, in fact, it is possible to build in the mid and long term a system of long-term care that is sustainable and possible and efficient. The improvement is part of the dynamic of the systems of social protection in Spain that we can implement perfectly well in this field as well. And are they sustainable? Yes, if there is the political will. Financial investment and a new social contract concerning the informal care within the society. What happens then? The Spanish system is conditioned by three different elements. The first one, a governance system that is a complex one, asymmetric, that has tended to create 17 systems of long-term care. The common link is one that I think is not enough and is weak. It's not to be like Jacobeans, but the minimum link, the common link has to be much more solid for this system to be more fair and has capability of social cohesion. The second problem is that the system has been integrated in the social services for the good and for the bad. There are many discussions about it. Will it be positive? Will it be negative? The truth is that being integrated in the social services system with 17 laws of social services in Spain, it has generated quite a big fragmentation and different modes of recalculating the co-payment until the hiring of services, etc., etc. And in the third place, still today, the Spanish society is walking slowly in the redistribution of care inside the society. The three elements are conditioning those systems. And in a very telegraphic manner, I would like to make reference to what I consider are the 5 pillars of the long-term care in Spain. I'm going to emphasize what are the aspects that can be improved, that are negative ones. And then and during the debate, I can point out the positive aspects as well. But the segments where we have to focus our debate are the following ones. Nearly all coincide in what Adelia has said. First, governance. That has to be clearly improved at all different levels, from the improvement of the system between the state administration and the autonomous communities, until the coordination, social and care coordination, and also, why not, think if the dependency has to be in the social setting or separated from the society. Think about that governance. That's the first item. Funding is the second part. We have to invest more. We need to invest more, because this model is a low protecting density, but we also have to manage it better. This means that we have to think about three elements. First, financing. At present, we spend around 0.9% of the GDP. The figures are not magic, but no doubt that what a country invests doesn't mean because it invests more, it's going to do it better. It depends on many different factors, but it's obvious that we have to invest more, even if it's only because the expenditure per capita between 2011 and right now has been reduced by 17%. It's one data. That forces us to think that we have to improve the funding. And secondly, this funding is affecting the intensity of the protection. This means that our investment is not well compared with the services and we deliver, both economic services, in the case, for instance, of aid to family aid, and also in the issue of the services themselves. In fact, we are resorting now to slowly, we are going towards a use that can be perverse, it may be, of the care or linked to the service as a replacement of the direct services. The benefit linked to the service is 64% of the cost of the services, direct services that are being delivered. The question is, are we doing it right? Are we using this linked to the benefits in order to save resources? Are we degrading the quality of this service at the same time in the mid and long term? And finally, the co-payment in the funding. There are 17 systems of co-payment, and I'm not exaggerating. Julia Montserrat has analyzed it very well in the last report and in year 2011, and this is an issue of debate, the permanent debate. Some consider one criterion and others another, and some there are people who receive, and in others those people don't receive. The income and heritage as criteria for co-payment. Do we have to use our own money? I doubt it. Most are don't do it. So the effort, the administrative effort, the expenditure that are generated to be able to guess the wealth of the persons is really, the money they have is extraordinary. We should have to think about that. And another general reflection as well, in patrimonial capitalism, as is the European one and our own, if we don't pay this taxes on our patrimony, are we going to redistribute for all the layers or for the small layers that do have very little money? We have maybe to focus on the income level and forget about the issue about the wealth. I state this as a didactic element. The third element is the issue of the management of the system itself. Two ideas as to access to the system and as to the benefits. As to access, we have a problem of we have to wait along waiting lists to be recognized with a certain degree and to access those services. Right now, if we add together the time between the request of the resolution, 207 days as an average, and between the resolution and the service delivery, 105 days, we have 342 days of waiting queue as an average. with a great catering, of course. In some places, in Castilla y León, they do it in 100 days. In the Canary Islands, 963 days. So, but altogether, we have a problem there. I'm not going to enter in this analysis of why this is so. We can do that later on. And secondly, as to the efficacy of these services or benefits, 3 ideas. We have to think about the catalog of services that will be delivered. It's a very old one, the one we have. We have to think about possible combinations, prevent the contradictions, look for sets of interventions, and review, as has been said here, the model of nursing homes. It is being done with pilot trials in our country. We have to improve the help at home, assistance at home, based on the obvious criterion that is not just protecting the dependent person, but generating the autonomy of the persons. And thus, from that point of view, home aid in the daycare centers or the nursing homes have to be impregnated by this fundamental criterion of generating the necessary conditions so that the role of the persons and their autonomy will be at the core. And in the last place, the quality. We have to think about 2 things. One, the different tools that we have available. We still don't have a critical mass in order to be able to create a common denominator for all these tools. And then as to the content, it is obvious that this can't be controls that are just based on standards and rules and instrumental. There have to be controls with respect to the quality of life of the persons. And finally, in 1 minute, employment. Employment has been reason for analysis in the report. I just would like to make a brief comment. Right now in Spain, we have approximately from 100% without taking into account the informal care is not included, care, professional care and pseudo-professional care. We have approximately around 800,000 people who work like that. 700,000 are women out of those 800,000, approximately. From those 700,000 who are women, nearly 8% of the population active occupied of women work in this sector. So what we have is the next. 34%, 238,000 work in nursing homes and community social services. We have to add 150,000 persons who work as caregivers at home, but that are not included in the dependency system. So all in all, we have practically 400,000 women who are working both within the formal system as in the pseudo-formal or informal system in the care sector. And finally, we have, and it's not a bad thing, we have 362,000 caregivers who are helps at home, assistants at home, who dedicate their time to accompanying the person's support, etc. That's the panorama that we have in Spain. What do I mean by that? We have 2 problems here. One, concerning the population that is hired to do that, the prevalence of the partial-time contracts, part-time contracts. This is a problem. And the second, in the second place, the salary differences altogether. In the case of the long-term care, salaries are 84% in the sector of services and 75% of the salaries of the whole of the economy. And also the difference between men and women. The salaries in this specific case, according to our report, it reaches 39% of difference in wages if you are a man or a woman. These are the data that refer to employment. And with this rapid portrait, and I end my intervention. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to the 3 speakers. You have been able to put on the table, to put forward and open a few things that we have opened here in all countries, a few problems that exist in all countries, and somehow we are occupied or concerned by in our systems of long-term care from different realities. But I believe that everything that has been mentioned here now, everything is now put forward before and the responsible persons have to make strategy about it, complemented with a second panel where we are going to talk more about the different models of good care. With all of this, we have now a sincerely very complex panorama ahead of us. I would like to try to divide the topics or the questions so that they would be complementary. But I also ask you, please, that any comment, complementary comment, we can make out of it a conversation, but of course always with little time, as always happens, but that's how things are. I think there are two issues that have been put forward in the three interventions. One is funding, of course, and the other one, the precariousness of care, training, low wages, and difficulties of availability of professionals, not trained, but scarcity of professionals, all in all. And in all of this, I would like, David, if you could go more into details. Of course, in the issue of funding, how are we going to be able to have a but a good and sustainable model? Here we have had several comments made by Gregorio that are our reality and from other countries. Most of the care is in the hands of the home employment and caregivers sector. And apart from the professional services, we look elsewhere and we talk continuously about professionalization, that certainly one person who comes from Honduras will have a hard time to make an FP2 in Spain in order to enter a vocational training program of a second level in order to be able to be a trained caregiver. We are facing dilemmas that are difficult to solve.
So, could you say something, David, about this, about all of these things, and also about the future? Because this is another important issue. And then we will open up the debate to the public. When I say the future, for example, smaller nursing homes, a more domestic model. Of course, different types of professionals are going to be needed for such smaller homes. So for us, that is one of the biggest challenges in Spain, but it generates many uncertainties and also resistances because, of course, they are more expensive. You need to change the way people are trained. So any comment you would want to make would be extremely welcome. You have 5 minutes. Muchas gracias. Bueno, son muchas preguntas. Si me dais 5 minutos, bueno, me voy a lanzar directamente a por ello. Bueno, pues creo que hemos perdido en Estados Unidos más de 400.000 trabajadores en este sector. Se ha recuperado un poquito, pero me refiero a trabajadores de residencias, pero estamos viendo una escasez enorme en este sector. Y como dije antes, la clave aquí tiene que ver con los emolumentos. Hemos perdido a estos trabajadores porque se han ido a trabajar a otros empleos en el sector sanitario, pero también hemos perdido a trabajadores que se han ido a otros sectores, ¿no? Gente que se ha ido a trabajar a Amazon o a otros tipos de hipermercados. Por lo tanto, ¿cómo hacer que la gente quiera desempeñar estos trabajos? Aquí se ha hablado también de prestaciones, también de una carrera profesional, ¿no? Porque en Estados Unidos hay algunos estados dentro del país, incluso algunas cadenas de residencias y empresas que han creado una carrera profesional, de forma tal que las personas pueden empezar, según van trabajando, se van formando y pues se van obteniendo diplomas. O sea, puedes empezar en un nivel bajo, pero a medida que van pasando el tiempo, pues el gobierno va pagando para que tú te formes y al final puedes sacar un diploma y obtener un salario mayor. En cuanto a la inmigración, ¿cómo poder atraer, ¿no?, a personas inmigrantes? Claro, algunos países, y creo que Estados Unidos está un poco rezagado, pues tienen algunas vías para facilitar la ciudadanía a estos inmigrantes, ¿no? Darles las armas necesarias, las herramientas necesarias para que puedan ocupar estos trabajos y para que esos trabajos les resulten atractivos. Estados Unidos no lo está haciendo. Creo que algunos países europeos sí están mucho más adelantados. Y luego Gregorio mencionó que España gasta un 0, no sé qué porcentaje exactamente del PIB en los cuidados a largo plazo. Estados Unidos gasta un 1,5%, pero Holanda se gasta el 3,5%, o sea que al final obtienes aquello por lo que pagas, ¿no? Y la mayor parte de este dinero pues es fundamental. Los modelos como el que comentaba de estas greenhouse, sí, son más domésticos y, como has dicho, los perfiles profesionales son diferentes, ¿no? En estas pequeñas residencias. Y sí, es verdad que los cuidadores hacen distintos tipos de tareas. Por un lado, ayudan a vestirse y a lavarse a los residentes, pero también ayudan en la cocina. Es decir, quizás son los mismos trabajadores, pero que han recibido una formación diferente. Se les paga mejor. Y además se les paga mejor. Y además estas pequeñas residencias tuvieron, por ejemplo, menos índices de fallecimientos durante el COVID. O sea que estas residencias funcionan mejor porque los puestos de trabajo que ofrecen son puestos de mayor calidad para sus trabajadores. Espero no haberme pasado de los 5 minutos que me asignaste. Pero lo que sí que quiero decir es que yo creo firmemente que sí. Lo que hay que hacer es poner los dólares en los bolsillos de los trabajadores y no en los bolsillos de las grandes empresas. Y esto es así en España y también en Estados Unidos. Va a requerirse una gran inversión, pero creo que sí que tenemos una gran oportunidad por delante.
Sí, sí. Creo que Adelina quiere...
I think Adelina wants to say something. Yes. I think it is very important for us to come to terms with the fact that an aging society needs to spend more on care. We can't have the same distribution of public expenditure that we had 20 years ago. And because, the demand is larger now. And if we don't do something, we will have many problems. And we've seen these problems during the COVID crisis. In some countries, there seems to be a greater level of responsibility. Public expenditure is adapting itself better to demographic changes. But in other countries, we seem to be stuck at a very low percentage of public expenditure. And this is something we need to mull over, in terms of what policy changes are necessary. Because, in some countries, we are not doing enough. And also, when we think of where to put our dollars, if we really want the nursing home sector to thrive, we also, and I think David would agree with this, and Gregorio and Maite too, we need to invest a lot in a good infrastructure in the community. We need to have a home care system that works properly, that is generous, and that is capable of preventing and rehabilitating people, preventing them from having to go to a nursing home when they can stay in their community. And now, my second reflection also has to do with the following. When we're trying to deinstitutionalize, people tend to panic, about the disappearance, quote unquote, of nursing homes. But of course, we're not really talking about just doing away with nursing homes. We're just talking about developing a system of smaller homes in parallel, trying to respond also to what people are demanding. But when push comes to shove, we're still seeing a huge difference between the amount of money dedicated to nursing homes and the amount of money dedicated to home services. So I would like, Adelina, for you to comment on the fragmentation of home care. We have a problem there because, and this problem means that the care of an individual, with, for example, advanced dementia, that gets 1 hour home support and who has a daughter who is the main caregiver. So I would like you to also make a comment about non-remunerated caretaking. And then there's also a cleaning lady who's normally a migrant, and then then this person with dementia is there's no clarity as to who should coordinate that group of caregivers. So we believe that a good coordination of a good ecosystem where there's alternative nursing homes, for example, but all of that needs to be coordinated because so far the picture is it's too haphazard. What can you tell us about this, Adelina? Well, with Maite, we have spent hours on end talking about what the ideal ecosystem would be. And I think that we should also think about the individual case. I have been analyzing countries at large for many years, but experiences are very different from not just from one country to the other, but from one neighborhood to the other. So I think that we need to, I'm a researcher, of course, but we need to see how to best assess all of these different coexisting systems. For example, in Spain, a system has been created by overlapping different reforms and changes to existing things that existed at a local level, at a family level, at the level of different levels of government, and different models have been overlapping one another. So what we need to do, I think, is just perhaps start from scratch and see things from the experience of a person or of a family who, where there has been a stroke or dementia. So what is the journey? What is the journey that is going to be most efficient and that is going to lead us to a better result in terms of quality of life for that person, not just of the person, but also of the person's environment. So putting the person at the center and see how the system can adapt to the person and not the other way around. And I think that can help us come up with a better diagnosis as to how our system is working. Because where there is a well-structured system, where when the need arises, an assessment is immediately made by the health system and by the care system to see how prevention can be managed, how to better control the impairment of that person. How can we put the person at the center? So I think there should be a kind of coordinator. There has to be a coordinator for each case, helping these people, helping these families, finding the best combination of services. And, of course, this coordinator needs to understand what the particular situation of each family is, understand whether the caretaker is a daughter who's trying to balance her job with taking care of her parent. Perhaps in those cases, a day center may be a good idea. Or if it's a couple and both of them are 90 years of age, perhaps the situation should be different. So the system, the solution should be structured around each person, trying to, preserve the person's autonomy and help them regain their capabilities. And that already exists. It is not utopia. In Denmark, for example, there is a lot of emphasis is laid on rehabilitation before other services are provided. Thank you. And now, Gregorio. With Gregorio, I'm sure that we would have a lot of questions for him because of the excellent work he's done to evaluate our law in Spain, our fragile law, which is at the same time a very important law, but perhaps, you talked about the eternal problem of governance, which is becoming an eternal problem. So do you think, Gregorio, that there is a remote chance that we might rationalize all of these different competences between different levels of government? Because in Spain, for example, there are 8,000 municipalities, and and many of them are not really capable of rising. I mean, they can't really provide the services required of them. So perhaps we should reduce the number of municipalities, because governance is very important, to make all the administrative procedures more agile. This is really a torture that many families have to contend with, because a lot of, for example, subsidies are given to people who have already died. So this is just terrible. It is exasperating. And then along these lines, there's a debate of economic benefit with its lights, economic benefits with their lights and their shadows, and then personal budgets. I would like you to tell me, Gregorio, about the pros and cons about this timid change that Spain has started to develop catalogues of services and benefits. Are you talking about governance as well? Well, about governance, there are two problems. One of them is a political problem. Let me just give you an example. The last accreditation agreement on quality was signed in June. How many regions supported it? Well, very few. So how is it possible? Even if it is an insufficient system with so many problems, how is it possible that regions are not aware that it is at least a step forward? Of course, an accreditation model may be riddled with errors, but if it does, involve an improvement, then why have so many regions voted against it? This is, difficult to understand. It's all political. It's all politics. But of course, social protection systems cannot, of course, be separated from politics, but I think they should be separated from sectarian dispute, because, all political parties should strive for the common good, and this is the main barrier we come up with. Because, there is either a change in this dynamics, that is taking long-term care out of the political debate, or, we will never be able to do anything. And this is key, for the very simple reason that if we solve the problem of governance, we will achieve a commitment for funding and to, at the same time, improve the efficacy of the system. For example, in the case of Spain, what is the percentage of people who are potentially dependent and who request a subsidy or a benefit? Well, only 40%. We have a long way to go. Of course, not all of them need to do so, but between that 40% and 100%, there is a huge percentage, 20, 30% of people who decide not to do it because they either have no information, they have to stand in a queue, and, they say, well, I'm going to get a pittance, so why should I bother? So, I have my cousin, I have caregivers, so I can resolve things on my own without having to go through that red tape. Governance also, another example is that if in a municipality, there are two people who are 80 years old, one applies for the dependency benefits, and they take 200 days to grant it to that person, and then they require co-payment. But in the same council, that same person and same as other people over 80, they get it within 15 days and everything for free, no co-payment. How is this possible? So don't governments talk to each other? Local governments don't talk to the central government? So it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So the same. It's two people who are the same age in the same council. One of them gets help immediately. The other one gets help in 200 days, and one of them doesn't have to pay a cent, and the other one is required to pay 50%. And then, in terms of economic benefits, well, at the beginning, people said that, economic benefits should not be given. People should receive the services themselves and not money to pay for those services. But of course, we don't have. It's so, especially at the beginning. But they were not very efficient, these economic benefits, because there is no control. There can be no control on the quality, for example, of the people hired to provide those services. Who are those people? What qualifications have they got? What is their role? But, and then there is the case of benefits linked to a service. They have their pros and cons. What are the pros of these benefits linked to a specific service? Well, there are no queues. You don't have to wait. You're free to choose. You don't have to wait for the government to say, you have to go to that center which is 20 miles from your home. You get some money and you choose whichever center suits you best. Or, a center that you appreciate, particularly because you've heard good things about it. And at the same time, it is cheaper for the government to do it this way. It's 65% cheaper than providing a direct service. So these solutions are very attractive because they give you freedom of choice, because they're easy to manage, and because they're cheaper. But the question is, are they more effective? And the answer is, well, you can't really say for sure. It depends. It depends on the circumstances, and there are some disadvantages, and I can see two of them. The first disadvantage is that when a person receives a benefit from the government, when a person receives a service from the government has to respond. But when you receive money, it is you have to claim if you have problems receiving that service. You've got to fight on your own. So you're free to choose, but if anything goes awry, you are on your own. And secondly, the economic benefit linked to a specific service has a middle-class bias. It is only applied for by people that say, well, with this little money and some money that I can contribute, I can resolve the problem. But people with no resources cannot really apply for it because that money is not enough. So there is a middle-class bias which should be avoided. And finally, I think that there is something that we noticed in the interviews, which was the people, service providers were complaining, both the mercantile and non-profit, they were complaining because public tenders are too stingy, and so salaries have to be low and working conditions are normally dismal. So a high-quality service requires high investment, so the prices should be reasonable, allowing these companies to provide high-quality services. And for that, you need to invest. And when we did the white paper, we said in 2015, we should have spent 1% of the GDP. It's 2023 now, and we're spending 0.9%. What is the level that we should be spending? How much should we be spending? Well, this requires broad debate, but ballpark, taking into account the relative efficacy achieved and problems with home assistance, well, it is clear that more money should be invested. Probably 7 billion euros more until 2030, until we reach 1.5% of the GDP. And I repeat, higher spending doesn't mean higher quality, but it is a prerequisite. So you need to make means available to improve quality and then have strict evaluation methods and developing a set of best practices which is extremely important. And we also need data. We do have a lot of data, but all the data is scattered. We need to have a common repository, a kind of database that researchers and professionals can access and draw from it lessons so that in a few years' time, by 2030 or by 2040, we may be in a position to have a long-term care system that is robust, powerful, efficient, and gives people, boosts people's quality of life. And we can't forget that, caretakers are very important. According to the European Commission, almost 12% of elderly people in Spain, over 16% of people over 16 years old are caretakers in Spain, and they devote about 20 hours a week to take care of other people. It's 1,050 non-remunerated hours, and that has to be brought down through a public system or a public-private system that is robust. And at the same time, we need to make it possible for people to be able to balance their tasks and, of course, preventing women from bearing the brunt of all this. Every 100 men, there were only 18 caretakers, and now the figure has risen to 38, but it is still not enough. We need to keep moving in the equality between men and women in this respect. Thank you. Well, as you can see, we could stay 5 hours talking about this. Before I give the floor to the audience, I would like to ask you, to beseech you, to write down your questions, because we can't have monologues, 5 or 10-minute long monologues. But before that, I would like to ask a question, because I'm quite concerned. At present, there's a very fair complaint, people are saying that the ratios of caretakers and professionals in nursing homes have to be increased. But this grievance is based on the traditional nursing home model, which is the model we are trying to improve on, with greenhouses or other types of solutions. So, and the type of professionals needed for that new model is going to be different. And David, in Spain, we have, very good professionals, or well, not that good probably as we have seen from COVID, but normally the teams of workers, nurses, physicians, rehabilitators, psychologists, social workers are normally quite competent. But then, caretakers, they come at the end, right? Caretakers. But in the home model, home-based model, how does all of this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the care needs there are greater because you're not able to enjoy the same economies of scale you might in a nursing home. And so in the home, in the community, the numbers are going to be greater. And once again, we've seen the same shortages in the US. You probably have seen them here in Spain, that a lot of individuals have also left that workforce. And so similar to here, Gregoria described it as a middle-class bias. We wrote a paper called The Forgotten Middle, and it's the same problem. There are a lot of Americans that are too wealthy to qualify for our state-funded Medicaid program, yet not wealthy enough to afford home and community-based services. Those services are very expensive. Senior living communities that are private pay are very expensive. And so how do we get services to those individuals in the middle that can't qualify for public services yet can't afford sort of a lot of the private pay options? We don't want to do this on the backs of lower wage workers. We need to pay our workforce wages commensurate with all the services that they're providing to our elders. So my sense is, Matej, it's going to require an incredible investment in home and community-based services. We have in the U.S. in our public side hundreds of thousands of individuals on the wait list waiting for services. So some states have done a good job of investing, but others haven't. That investment, once again, when we pay more for those services, let's put them into the workforce, because otherwise we're not going to have adequate care for older adults. There's going to be real gaps. And once again, we have to make these jobs worth having, with good pay and benefits, but also sort of opportunities for advancement, through educational credits. I think there's a lot we can do to support this workforce outside of paying. Certainly, paying them is necessary once again, but I don't believe it's sufficient to really attract the kind of caregivers that we need in this space. Thanks.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I believe that now is the turn for the audience to ask questions, but only with one clarification. We have spoken continuously about long-term care and dependency situations, but we could also have been speaking about functional diversity and support, and a debate that we will have to open soon on care, support, and the meeting point for both of them, that more and more are more numerous. We would thank very much, as we said, to have short interventions from your side. That's why that it's much better to write them down. You concentrate your ideas much better in that way, and also identify to whom you are asking the question, if it's possible. Let's try to make interventions that are addressed to somebody and not for all, because otherwise, with two interventions, we have covered the whole time that we have available. You have the floor. The title of the day is long-term care, but in reality, we are talking about systems of long-term care. We don't talk about the long-term care by the family, and I'm referring especially to long-term care to people with intellectual disabilities, functional diversity that you mentioned before, where the family care are the care, long life care throughout the whole life since they are born, and to stay at in our homes. That's something that was mentioned before. Here, the relation would be to ask you a few words about independent life, but not a solitary life alone, being alone. Who wishes? Otherwise, we have in the audience also some super experts in that field, yes, that are also invited to take part in this discussion, of course.
You raise a great point that we often think about. Is long-term care a policy issue? And that's kind of the way we framed it today. Or is it a family issue? And I would say it's both. And in the U.S. and also here in Spain and most developed countries, the family is really the backbone. and provides a lot of the services, especially for those with intellectual disabilities. That doesn't mean there isn't a role for a strong sort of policy intervention. We had a paper recently showing that the US is doing quite poorly in terms of individuals under the age of 65 who are entering nursing homes. And they're doing that because we haven't, as a country, made the investment in home and community-based care. This becomes too much for the family, and so the individual has to enter a nursing home. How do we provide that support? I think the family will always have a role, but it shouldn't be a substitute. It should be a complement, and that complementary role is one where we're making an investment in policy throughout the life course. Thanks for that question.
Gracias por la pregunta. Thank you. Microphone. We talk about long-term care of people already disabled, but it's not. But the amplitude of our retirement, of inactivity, labor, life inactivity, leads us to a greater disability. From the psychological point of view, activity, motivation, the stimuli, the goals to be reached make us have mental activity that is more developed, and thus a prolongation of our different skills and capabilities. So thus, I believe that we have to pay attention, very important attention, to the non-deterioration, to the maintenance of our skills and mental faculties. I don't want to dwell too much on that, but for instance, in Spain, fortunately, they are creating the so-called the elderly universities in different universities. Each one of those universities have that activity included. I think that this could be one way. And then apart from the intellectual one, we have the socialization, the social life of people that also contributes, as has been proven by the development or the human evolution. The greater the socialization of the person, the greater has been the progress that we have had in mankind. Also, at the specific level, the same thing happens. The inserso in Spain, the communities in Madrid at least, is developing that capability of socialization of the elderly. It's very important. The creative activities, developing them as well, in order for the elderly people to have not only goals and motivations, but also stimuli that give them a feedback that makes that the person is being more interested in her own personal development. Thank you very much. Well, I would like to say that in a meeting of 4 hours, nearly everything is left outside. But it's true that the prevention issue, we haven't touched upon it practically. At any rate, Adelina wants to make a comment. Yes, we have a great opportunity of preventing and rehabilitating. This doesn't mean a loss of skills immediately. There are many factors and many opportunities of modifying the relationship between aging and have a disability. At the individual level, it's very difficult sometimes. Things may happen to us, although we do well, but we know that there are many data and studies that show that we have many opportunities of modifying the risk of, or reducing the risk of loss of faculties and skills. It's important to see that Japan, the most aged country in the world, is investing a lot in prevention within the care system. And in fact, I was looking at the data. They have practically the same amount of employees in daycare centers than in double in daycare centers and than in residences. And and they have home care than also more than in the daycare and care centers. And what do they do in the daycare centers? These are community centers from the neighborhood, center for prevention, where they do social activities, they do exercise and multiple activities to maintain the persons with a social life and facilitating at the same time physical exercise and using their skills. And this is one of the countries where they are most concerned by the aging, where they are investing more in trying to maintain as much as possible the skills and capabilities of the persons. In Denmark, we have something similar as well, where there is a very important proactive effort of prevention with visiting people, talking about what they can do, what would they like to do, what are their activities that with a little support maybe they still could do instead of being at home the whole day because it's hard for them to participate. I think that we here have an opportunity of changing, and we also see that there are many modifiable factors concerning the relationship between aging and disability. Very good question, by the way. Thank you very much. And I also add that in Spain, since the 80s, more or less, until now, we can have around 5,500 centers of different activities, skills development, etc. But we are not doing poorly in that sector, but now we have to rethink how to organize daycare centers that really are more efficient with a level of a slightly greater dependency level. But that's what we are trying to do. But we have still many more things to do. Hello. Thank you to the three speakers for your presentations and the causes that led us to the tragedy of the deaths of the elderly people, especially in nursing care homes. And I would like to ask you a question. The three, and I agree with everything what has been said, did refer to the opportunities of change, transformation, innovation, etc. But do you really believe that one can innovate and transform without having demanded political responsibilities and accountability from our governments in each one of the states, and particularly here in Spain, the autonomous communities, where there have been great differences in the management of the pandemic and in the mortality in each one of the autonomous communities here in Spain? And the second question is, have you really thought what it means to establish information systems in the long-term care systems? Have you made any progress? Could you tell us something about what could be possible to be done in some autonomous communities in Spain within the coming 5 years, when we are in a country that in 2023 we don't yet know the mortality of the residents in the residencies? And the third question, can some of the speakers go more into depth in the issue of access to healthcare services in the residence, in the nursing care home, when we have a primary care system that guarantees that each citizen in Spain has a primary care physician that is willing to help him. And the barriers that we right now have for that primary care doctor or that team of primary care with a nurse, physical therapist, etc., can take care of the elderly who are in the nursing care homes. Thank you very much, Dr. Zunzunegui, who knows excellently well this whole issue, and that is achieving an comprehensive job on this topic. Any of the speakers can take the floor. Well, a first answer, quick answer. I believe that one thing doesn't prevent the other. That means we don't have to wait to innovate, transform, and change until we haven't had any responsibilities, until we haven't clarified what happened during the pandemic in the nursing care homes. I think these are two related things. but one is not a condition for the other. We have to walk in the line of keeping on innovating, changing, transforming. And obviously, this society has to be fully aware with everything that means. What have we done well and what have we done badly during the pandemic? The second item, information, is important as well. A positive step has been made. For instance, in the CISAD, the information system of the Inserso has made a change, and there is a lot of information that didn't exist before. This is a good step forward. The truth is that the information that we have available now compared with a couple of years ago or 1 year ago has nothing to do. And it has to keep on being better, better and better. First, in order to tell what the system is doing, but also so the citizens have a knowledge of the development of the public policies. And there is another important element together with information. Not only is the statistical information, but also facilitate the information to the citizen himself so that it's a simple one, so that when he has to ask or request an assessment or something, it's not a complex thing to do. These are two levels, the information, the statistical information that is account for the policies and the social is useful for the social research, and the other one, the necessary information for the citizen who in a flexible manner can address the public administration. And then, with respect to the last item, I'm not an expert in this, but I have also always learned from people like Mike and others who know about this topic that obviously we still have a long way to go. And in the issue of the nursing care homes, the issue of the health care in the nursing homes, what happened shouldn't have happened. That's the truth. Everything should have been done easy and reasonable for the people so that the people could have been taken care of in a very complex moment. It's not to set up a hospital in the nursing care home, not creating complex systems, but yes, a very agile system of communication between the nursing care homes, the different services, and the healthcare services. So there has to be teams that coordinate, that are informed, that follow that information, and that assess the situation at each point in time. Thank you.
David.
Yeah, just very quickly, I can't speak to the situation here in Spain, but your question could have been asked about the United States. We're in the same kind of place in how do we encourage transformation and innovation alongside how do we get accountability for what happened over the past 3 years. Might I mention I've testified several times during the pandemic to our Congress. I was there several months ago. You've been much better hosts than they were, by the way. They were very aggressive that day. There was a lot of finger pointing with both parties wanting to blame kind of the other political party for all of the problems we had during the pandemic. I think it was more about obfuscation versus true engagement and wanting to kind of change our system. And so I worry a little bit, both here in Spain and in the US, that we get trapped in kind of finger pointing and don't put our heads down. Yes, we need the accountability. I hope we get it, but I also hope that we're willing to do the hard work now to transform the system. And I think those can happen, as Gregoria said, in parallel. They don't have to be an either or. Thanks.
From my point of view, the first thing is that I believe that in many countries, the lives of people have not valued enough in the nursing care homes, and they haven't spoken enough about the impact that the pandemic has had in those people and in their relatives and in the staff of the residences as well, that very often were there without the possibility of helping in terrible situations. I believe that in South Africa, after the apartheid, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I believe that for me this could be a sort of inspiration of how to be doing well this examination of what has happened. If we don't try to understand well what happened, what were the systemic elements that allowed for some things to happen, if we don't go if we are unable to understand it well, we are not going to be able to learn well how to do things. But if we create a too hostile environment, that's also bad, because then it's much more harder to have constructive discussions. Very often we find the political blockade, and this is making us be far away from what we were mentioning, how important it is to unify the political will and to look for the common good. After the pandemic, we have the duty of looking for the common good, learn and take actions, and we have to look for ways of doing both things, to recognize, acknowledge what has not been done well and understand why. And when we have to look for responsibilities, do it always in a constructive manner, in my opinion. And where we really, because if we don't learn from this, this is when we really will have to have a great problem. Concerning the infrastructure of the data, I have been very much in Denmark, and I talked very much about Denmark. It took them to generate a good infrastructure of data, practically 20 years. But they unify the governance, and this is what allowed them to have a good data system. When you have a fragmentation of the governments, you have fragmentation of the data as well. And it's very hard to go from that fragmentation to a consistent data system if you haven't improved the governance. And as to the primary care in the nursing homes, I go back to Denmark. It's a country where they were able to vaccinate all people within less than 1 week in the nursing care homes, because every residents have a nursing care home, have their own primary care doctor and primary care team that takes care of them. They had it before the pandemic, so during the pandemic that worked fine. In the pandemic, the persons in the nursing homes had access to healthcare because they had it already before the pandemic. And this is something that one of the lessons learned that I think we have to take into account. The persons in the nursing care homes have to have the right to medical care independently of where they live, and they have to have full access to these rights, human rights. Another great topic, once again, would take a long time. Theoretically, we have finished our time. We can give 5 minutes for 1 or 2 more questions with a joint answer, and close this session, because this is now when I think that all of us have a lot to say, and much more so with this last intervention that we've heard. I have to refrain from trying to say something myself. I see pretty good number of hands. I think that 2 interventions, please, at the back. Thank you. Thank you, Maite. Very briefly and synthesizing. A question for David and Adelina, mainly, with respect to the homely model in the community, or houses for the elderly inserted in the community. In the 167 houses, we are trying to adapt them here in Castilla-La Mancha. The question has to do the experience that you have in both countries. Are those houses incorporated to the normal, standardized or normalized system of care, these home nursing care models, understood like living together 10, 12 people in the rural environments and in other regions? And the second place, in some occasions, the small models, they ask for us to solve problems because we leave them in a very acute manner, as, for instance, when that normally the big system should solve them. We suffer in those small houses, small housing models, the difficulties of coordination, as was said before, of social and healthcare. Has that been solved in the other countries, those who have this experience with these home-like models? And with respect to the qualifications of the staff in the small units for elderly, there are not great technicians nor experts. There are caregivers, both men and women who care for people who have proven during the pandemic, at least here in Spain, that they have taken care. They have been excellent caregivers with very scarce training in the technical aspects, but with a human value that has been absolutely fantastic, couldn't be surmounted. Only these three things. I don't know. There is another person at the back, another one. You will have to agree because it's only one who can take the floor. But with the microphone, please. And here two other persons have to agree. Turn your head and you will find somebody else, a fantastic woman who also would like to ask the floor. And with that, unfortunately, we have to close. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. We have talked about begin again, the need of looking for the common good, and also, and most of all of that process that exists everywhere in Spain of lack of governance. The question I'm asking you, do you consider that a comprehensive law protecting the rights of elderly at the state level could end with all these problems, or would that benefit in favor of that common good? Well, I think that you can make a comment, each one of you, if you want, and with that we come to a close for this part of the session. Our country is a country that likes to do many laws that then are just left there. And I don't think we need a special law for the rights of the elderly. I think that we have the European pillar of social laws that is very clear. There are a series of principles, not only dependency and others, that are very clearly recognized, acknowledged. It's enough that the ordinary legislation in practice is guided based on these principles. I don't see the added value of a new law. Maybe I can't see it and I'm blind, but I think that what we've got already, we have to try to progress and advance and reform in a path where, as it has been said here this morning, the goals are clear-cut. What do we want? Protect the rights of the persons in situation of dependency based on their autonomy. If we have a clear idea about the European pillar, and if we know as well the dimension, technical, functional dimension, the model of care centered in the person-centered, then if later on we have a law of new rights, we do that. But I don't know what it would add right now to the current situation. Maybe make things even more complicated. Well, I would put a law, not this one, but partly because I don't like to distinguish by age. If people with loss of capability can have any age, some start very young and others at the end of their life. But what I would like to have is a law that guarantees the rights to family life, of the persons, whether independently of where they are living. There has to be a consulting body in all the decisions that affect them in their daily life, and where both the residents and the relatives are present, especially for relatives of demented patients who cannot have an advocate, who can't claim on their own. For me, this would be a very important path, how the centers are guided and what's the voice of the people who live there. And concerning the models, or the other question before, there are very clear, interesting examples in the Nordic countries, and then I think we will listen about Holland, the Netherlands. The next session will answer the question of the different models. But it's important for them to be integrated in the system, the general system. And those examples in Spain that are very good, small examples that we can learn from. And I think that it's important to share the good practices, because in the sector of care, I think we can enter otherwise a vicious circle. Low expectations, and people do not trust too much, and then they don't ask too much from the system either, and not from the politicians either in the system. I think that those good examples, the changes, can lead us to a virtuous cycle where we have greater expectations, we ask more, and this will also lead us, I hope, to having more political attention.
So I'll also address the gentleman in the back around the small home model. You asked about kind of regulation. We have found that a challenge with the greenhouse. Some of the small home models, I wouldn't say they conflict with some of our regulatory requirements, but that has been a challenge, like having an RN, a registered nurse on duty for so many hours, and it's just been hard to spread that scale out such that we can kind of fit our different innovative models to the regulation, and that strikes me that's a U.S. regulatory problem, not a greenhouse problem, but that has been challenging. The workforce issue, on the other hand, when new staff come to a greenhouse, or new sort of developers who are interested in building the greenhouse model, they'll ask, where did you find these amazing workers? And the answer is, we train them. Like, you can build the workforce. That to me, you can build it here in Spain. As you noted, the caregivers are wonderful. Their duties and responsibilities can be expanded. That's not the limit. The limit is regulation and the way we often frame this issue. Thanks.
Okay.
Pues thank you very much, and I apologize for being pressed by the fact of not having freedom of expression today, but also because most of the people who are here, we have concern and also an enthusiasm, limit-free enthusiasm about the possibilities of change that we have ahead of us in the coming years. But for that, we do need more social awareness, more will, in order to believe that it is worthwhile to invest and to pay taxes. And because I don't know any other formula, but if the one who knows one can tell us about it, that would be fine, so that we can have a country where we can live better with needs of support and care. Thank you very much.